What is going on, guys? Welcome back. Ryan Moody, Jimmy Smith, our MMA show. Want to thank everybody that supported us over on YouTube. We are coming to a truce today. Jimmy Steelers beat my Colts on Sunday. It's too difficult to talk yesterday, but we're going to take care of this today. And
We're professionals and we can move past it. I just want you guys to know that.
I didn't say that. When did I say I was going to move past it?
Oh, good point. Yeah. I was kind of speaking for you there.
Taking liberties is what you were doing. and with the prep we just did, you can't call us professionals. So, moving on. UFC, I'm going to set it aside for about 25 minutes and then I'll go back to my sorrows. UFC 244. You know, when we go into cards, a lot of times there's a whole bunch of stories, and I really felt like for the first time in a while, I was getting concrete answers to my questions, and then the wheels fell off. We're going to start with Gregor and Kevin Lee. You know, the reality is, even myself had all questioned Kevin Lee's level, and I guess he needed a statement win to get back in my good graces. You can sit here and question why, Gregor didn't pressure inside or didn't wrestle, but the end result is, he went with a game plan that he thought was going to work best, and he got picked apart from the outside. He committed to those strikes, and I mean, Kevin Lee kicked him into outer space. One of the silliest looking knockouts you'll see. Literally, he took a seat into the fence, and it was absolutely, viciously beautiful in a way. But you know what? Kevin Lee, at least with that performance, is back, and that was a pretty big statement because he took down a great wrestler and showed that he has quite the power.
A great wrestler with an undefeated MMA record. Keep that in mind. And to me, this was a battle of two fighters at 155 who might have the skill set to give Khabib problems, because this is not a division loaded with great wrestlers. Of course, Justin Gaethje can wrestle, but everyone forgets that because he just knocks everybody out. But when it comes to Gregor Gillespie, four-time All-American, national champion in Edinburgh, Khabib steamrolls most people because they just don't have the wrestling background to stop him. Barboza, Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier, never stepped on a Division I mat. So the question is, who at 55 has the wrestling chops to stop Khabib? Of course, there is Gaethje. We don't see a lot of it, but I've heard great things about his wrestling. But I think Gregor Gillespie was a name that was popping up a lot whenever I was discussing, God, who might have the skill set to actually beat Khabib wrestling? Who can stop his grappling? Who can stop his takedown? Who can maybe take him down? Gregor Gillespie kept coming up. Now, I said about a year ago that, a year and a half ago, whenever it was, Kevin Lee might have the toughest style for Khabib because he can wrestle. He has excellent stand-up, good combinations, and then he kind of went on this skid that sort of changed all of that. The loss to Ally Quinta, trouble making weight, goes up to 170, loses to Rafael Dos Anjos, and a lot of the shine was kind of taken off Kevin Lee. And then all of a sudden, he takes on Gregor Gillespie, the standout wrestler that everybody thought was going to be the next big thing, and he starched him. And what I noticed immediately was nice low stance, ready to stop the takedown, but straight, tight, clean, accurate punches that keep a grappler at a distance. That jab was money. That's what set everything else up. I was really impressed with his performance.
Yeah, a statement win to say the least. Moving up, Ivanov and Lewis. Lewis, I will say, really surprised me. Had great movement, worked the body. I was concerned in the first round. While I was watching the first round, he did a couple things, especially he grabbed the cage to stay up, and it was very desperation-like. And it made me worry that he didn't want to go to the ground. It made me worry that he was maybe known to have a cardio issue, and he was scared to get some weight on top of him. But however, he proves me wrong. He looked sharp the entire fight. He only allowed 3 takedowns. And I'm telling you, from round 1 to round 3, he swung heavy. Without a doubt, his best looking win, even without the highlight, his by far most complete fight. This is what I needed to see from him. I just hope this is what we consistently see going forward.
It was like he suddenly decided to take it seriously. That's what it looked like to me. This was a guy who, I don't want to say reveled in the fact that he didn't take it that seriously, but he seemed to be like, hey, I'm just out here knocking guys out. I'm not a mixed martial art. He told me that when I interviewed him. before when he fought in I want to say Austin, Texas. And it was, oh, no, I'm not a mixed martial artist. I'm just a guy who likes to go out there and brawl and throw big punches. I'm not really a professional at this. It's like he almost reveled in the fact that he was just out there brawling, having fun. The guy I saw take on Blagoy Ivanov looked like a professional. He looked like someone who took it really seriously. He was slim. He looked like he was in good shape. He was patient, still had power, paced himself very, very well. He looked like someone whose work ethic and dedication kind of caught up to his natural skills. Naturally heavy-handed, naturally knocking guys out, naturally aggressive. But now it looks like he really cares. Like, man, I want to do this for a living and hang with the best. Now, this is a guy who I think got a title shot based on his ability to knock people out and not much else. If you add in a little patience and a little, a little bit of skill rounding, he might get another shot. If he stays, a hard hitter in the heavyweight division is always going to have some marquee value. But if you add to it some work ethic and the things that I think he was lacking before, dangerous guy. And Ivanov fought a very good fight. Went in there, got some good throws, got some takedowns, couldn't really keep Lewis down like I thought he might. Couldn't do a lot when it came to avoiding Lewis's power punches. He would angle out, but he got hurt a couple times. Lewis really looked solid. I was very impressed with him.
I would go as far to say if the Derrick Lewis showed up for that fight that had showed up for the past 3 fights still came, I have a feeling he would have lost. It really seemed like the commitment showed through in the performance, and it's nice to see. A lot of times it's the other way around, but he really did look sharp and on point.
Yeah, and when you think about how far he went, basically based on heavy-handedness and balls and guts, that's impressive. If he puts it all together, I think we might see another heavyweight run because so many of those fighters at the top are just getting old. I've said this a lot of times before. It's just a matter of we're talking about the same names for maybe the past decade. Love Junior Dos Santos, obviously. Love Stipe, love Overeem. They've been in the game a long time. There's a lot of room for that new blood.
Moving up the card, Vincent Luque, Stephen Thompson. We talked about Thompson's confidence. And to me, right away, I saw him come out. Classic stance, hands low. Was really happy. Took some heavy shots. Returned fire. Got a little bit cornered, in my opinion. Several times, I was amazed how well, he was able to get kind of put back in the octagon. But he did a masterful job. Stayed aggressive. I will say I'm very interested in your take on this because in the 3rd round, he let him up twice, which I think speaks to the confidence, but at the same time, had an opportunity to finish him and still could have been caught. And you've been critical just last week, as a matter of fact, of fighters who don't take full advantage of position. So I was really surprised to see Stephen Thompson do that. But at the same time, this, much like with Kevin Lee, not nearly on the skid, mind you, but this was really the performance that we needed to see to know that, hey, the Pettis deal happened, right? That took place, but it didn't change the person coming into the cage the next time. Because I hate to say it, if Stephen Thompson loses that stance, loses that free-flowing motion, loses a lot of that aggression and distance, he would be a totally different fighter. So talk about answering questions. This one really answered the question for me.
It did. And there were a few things that stood out to me in this fight. Number one, Vicente Luque was having success with power punches in the 1st round. I tweeted out, I don't know if you saw it, that's a bad sign. Because Thompson's hard to time, he's hard to figure out, his range is always changing. But he also has his hands very low. And once you do kind of crack the code, he's just not a defensive fighter in that regard. He doesn't bring his hands up, doesn't really tuck his chin. Once you can figure out his movement and his timing, if you can land power shots early, he's in a lot of trouble. So the 1st round, I thought he was in trouble simply because Luque was landing power punches. It wasn't a wipeout 1st round, of course, but it didn't bode well for things to come. And guess what? He made great adjustments with his footwork and started landing punches of his own. And I think that's the thing that is underrated is he didn't get back into it offensively with his feet. He didn't out-kick Luque. He was out-punching Luque. And Vicente Luque was out-punching him in round 1, and then in rounds 2 and 3, he was battering him with punches. A lot of power shots from both sides because he switched stances. So you never know which side the power shot's coming from. And he was just taking him apart, knocking him down. And with, 3 minutes left in the third round, he lets him back up. I couldn't believe that one. I really couldn't, because I was like, look, land on top of him, ground and pound. He's already rocked. He's already hurt. Stay on top for 3 rounds for 3 more minutes and you win. So I thought it was, obviously it paid off, but risky tactical choice. Very risky tactical choice. Because stay on top, 3 minutes, you win. So last round, you're winning. And he decided to stay on the feet where he, obviously ended up winning the fight. But against a dangerous, powerful striker, that was a risky move. I'm glad it paid off.
Well, this is where our prep really shines. You've not been known to watch full cards, so I'm just going to come out and ask you, did you watch any of the prelim card?
I caught the main event of the prelims. I caught the Johnny Walker fight, and he got blown out of the water.
Okay.
Yeah, that.
So
you got to remember, I do the post-fight show, and so if I'm there the whole time, it just drives me nuts. Like, I work till 3 a.m. those nights. So, yeah, I just do the main card generally when I have to work afterward.
Well, what you missed wasn't, I don't want to say much as far as we knew the end result. Knockouts, I mean, really, there were, unless you went to the UFC Fight Pass or the early prelim card, there wasn't a whole lot of head scratchers, if you will. We've got the answers to just about every question. Then we run into Darren Till and Kelvin Gastelum. And Jimmy, to be honest with you, this was the most anticlimactic, non-memorable. I would not say it was boring, but you could watch this fight and you could have to describe it to somebody, and it's like, yeah, there just wasn't any true moment where I was like, yeah, that's where Darren Till wants to take over. That's where Gastelum wants to take over. It was just almost like one of those times where two guys whose styles mesh just a little bit too much come together, and we just kind of get a fight that just falls flat. Now, I've heard all different types of responses to, Gastelum got robbed, to Darren Till was dominant. I don't really know how to feel about this fight. I know that of all the other ones on the card, and I did watch the entire card, this was the one that was, I don't want to say the worst, but it was the least clear.
That's very true. And an important thing to keep in mind, whenever I see this, I kind of give a big sigh. The 3 scorecards were 30-27 Till, 30-27 Gastelum, 29-28 Till. So 3 judges saw the same fight totally differently. Whenever you have a 30-27 on one side and a 30-27 on the other, unless somebody's blind, it just gives an indication of what kind of fight this was. Did I think Darren Till won? Yes. Did he ever put a stamp on anything? No. Did he ever hurt him? No. It was an awkward, difficult fight in that regard. No one seemed to really get their timing or their rhythm very well. Gastelum, and the reason, if you remember, I picked Till for this one. I lost the first 2 in picks. I picked Stephen Thompson, I picked Till, and I picked Masvidal. When I picked Till, it was an emotional pick, or kind of a gut pick. And the reason was, I thought after the championship loss to Israel Adesanya, there'd be a down, right? You worked so hard for a championship fight. You lost it by 1 round. It's hard to regroup. It's hard to then put that much into it. It's hard to then go, okay, there's almost always a drop. There was for Darren Till. Remember, he got blown away by Tyron Woodley. What happens the next fight? He gets knocked out by Masvidal. So it happens all the time. I thought Kelvin Gastelum would have that kind of performance, and he did. He didn't. He seemed a little flat. He didn't seem as explosive. He didn't seem as aggressive. He couldn't really get it into that short to medium range where he's so deadly against Till. It seemed to me, Till did just enough, and Gastelum just wasn't able to hit the gas when he needed to. That combination kind of allowed Till to win the fight.
Are you willing to look at this and say that this was a Darren Till unaffected by a weight cut in a late entry? Because I didn't see anything that really stood out to me that said he wasn't ready. And I watched the early weigh-ins. I watched the ceremonial weigh-ins. I was looking for, telltale signs of he wasn't on point. And honestly, he looked fine. He actually looked much, much better than I expected him to. You listen to the pre-show, it was kind of a big deal that we made about this. And I don't want to say that he proved us wrong, but it certainly didn't appear to be the deal to him that we made it out that it could be.
Yeah. But if you heard his post-fight comments, man, about how scared he was considering faking an injury, the mental things he was going with. I think really brave of him to talk about those things. And mentally, he was just kind of all over the place. He was just, his confidence was shot, the legal trouble he was in. He was under a ton of stress. And to kind of come through and fight at all under those circumstances, let alone get a win against someone like Gastelum, that just says a lot about him. And I was really glad to hear those things from him, that he understands the mistakes he made, that he regrets them, that he faced a lot of fear and a lot of demons, and hopefully he's doing better against those demons and he gets some of that confidence back. But the fact that he was talking about something fighters don't ever talk about, which is fear and pain and all those things, I my hat's off to him. It really is.
Yeah, the problem is that so much of the resolution to that is out of his control, and that's going to be something that stays with him for a very long time, whether he elects to overcome it or not. Just because he's open about those things, which, don't get me wrong, is great. And, I certainly think that he should share that with his fan base, which I'm sure has a lot of questions of why up until now they really haven't seen him fight in the U.S. So while he does owe that to a degree, he can be remorseful. He can be upset about it. But at the same time, you're dealing with a fight promotion that truly bases itself, for the most part, in the U.S. You've now fought in the U.S. only twice. So it's really not your call to get those things right. And we've seen with other fighters, they don't go away. It's not something where people are able to excuse this, right or wrong, because you're an athlete. So I see what you're saying, but at the same time, I hope he can get them resolved. But if he can't, honestly, no one to blame but himself.
No, completely. But relating those things, we've seen people make these same mistakes and blame everyone but themselves. We've seen people make these mistakes and not acknowledge the toll it takes on them, that they're just having a good time or whatever, it's somebody else's fault. Him to say, all these mistakes I've made had really weighed on me, and I was really wondering if I could still do that. I was really wondering about these things. That's an important step, to even make the mistakes he's made and acknowledge they were mistakes. And that it is weighing on me. And I am scared about going to jail. And I am scared about not getting a visa and continuing my fight career. We've seen people run into these problems and never acknowledge that it's an issue for them. And I think that's an important step. Will he resolve it? I don't know, any more than you do. But acknowledging it is step number one. And that's awesome that he's doing that.
To move forward to the main event, and I think it's important that we preface this, that all the buildup in the world, the card, for the most part, sold on this, even down to the point that, ironically enough, there was no one else on the poster. It was just Jorge and Nate. We have a doctor stoppage in this. And, I mean, there's no other way to discuss that than that's what happened. And I think it does leave us with a lot of concerns. But I will also say, and the sentiment to this was not very popular, like a lot of things I say, Jimmy, I'm not wanting to see this fight run back. I know that seems popular, but at the same time, this to me was kind of a one-off thing, and it fell short of expectations to many based on the stoppage, and that's okay. I joked with you earlier, I'm not mad, I'm disappointed, but I wasn't behind the idea to begin with, of a faux pas belt, selling a main event card. If anything, I could see it as a novelty. I'm not ready to see the novelty come back. And all you can say about, Nate and his comeback, and this was his game plan, and he wasn't all that beat up, and he's been cut worse before. And listen, those are all things that are very true. And I do believe that he is a fourth and fifth round fighter and always has been. And his strength was certainly more than likely going to come into factor in those last two rounds. But the problem was, before then, Jorge Masvidal was beating him relatively soundly, and it was going to take a comeback performance, which, again, more than capable of, but it was going to take that for him to come back and win. So I'm not very willing to give this one a second go round if we're going to go back through this whole horse and pony show again, where, you know, they're touting out this belt. It just seemed a little bit overdone, a little bit really not accustomed to what the UFC does. So I'm glad it's over. I'm not particularly happy with how it ended. It was an entertaining fight when it lasted, but alas, not the performance, actually not the end result I think anyone wanted.
There's something I want to point out. A couple of things I want to point out. Number one, there's a difference between disappointed and outraged. I'm seeing a lot of outrage about the stoppage. That's ridiculous. I was disappointed. I want to see more of the fight as well. The reason we have fights is the same reason we have sporting events. The same reason we have any competition, to see who's better. Jorge Masvidal was clearly the better fighter that night. End of story. It was a boxing match with MMA gloves, essentially. Masvidal was the superior boxer. He was piecing Nate Diaz up. Could Nate Diaz have come back in rounds 4 and 5? A couple things I want to point out. Number one is, people don't magically get tired around the Diaz brothers. They put pressure on you. They work the body very well. They have a volume attack. You throw a lot of power punches that don't land. That combination of things is what wears out most Diaz opponents, right? That combination. Nate, in this fight, could do none of those things to Jorge Masvidal. He didn't bring physical pressure, wasn't landing body shots, wasn't landing a volume of punches, wasn't getting Masvidal to throw a bunch of power shots that weren't landing to wear him out. None of those things happened. So people who think Nate was going to come back, he hadn't set the table for coming back. He hadn't done the things you have to do in order to come back. Nate has no stoppages past round 3. Nate is not a one-shot power puncher. Nate had no choice in this fight but to stop Masvidal. Meaning, could he have won rounds 4 and 5? Sure, he could have. Then he loses 3 rounds to 2. So the idea that Nate was going to come back and stop Masvidal, and I want to make this abundantly clear, winning the last 2 rounds would not have been good enough. He would have had to have stopped him. And there was just no indication leading into that 4th round that was going to happen. He hadn't set the stage for it. Somebody tweeted at me today. They said, well, you know, you never would have known that DC was going to get knocked out by Stipe Miocic in the 4th round. I disagree completely. Number one, Stipe had won one of the 3rd round on 2 of the judges' scorecards. So he had success before. Number 2, he's a knockout puncher. Number 3, he had knocked people out past the 3rd round. Diaz hadn't won a single round on any scorecard on Saturday. He's never had a stoppage past round 3. And he's not a knockout puncher. So could he have come back? Sure. You cannot point to anything. There's no evidence. There's no stat. There's no history you could point at that makes me say that you could go, see, that's why he would have won. Other than, well, he tends to have better cardio than everybody. Yeah, but one of the reasons he has better cardio than everybody is he's wearing them down. And they can't keep up. It's not that he has an endless gas tank and other fighters don't. It's that he makes you fight in a way that uses up your gas tank. And he wasn't making Masvidal fight that way. So the disappointment, I understand. The outrage, to me, is unacceptable. It's just not. I mean, and that was a gnarly cut, too, both of them. Have I seen worse cuts that didn't stop fights? Yes. But I've seen cuts that were smaller that did stop fights. It was in fight-stopping range, and there is a medical professional who's a couple feet away from it, who's looking right at it, who is probably a better judge than us sitting on our couches. So I suggest everybody keep that in mind for this one.
Well, fitting, because that's exactly where I was going to go. So first and foremost, we just saw Tyson Fury go through a worse cut. I'm not a medical professional, but I do have a set of eyes.
Looked worse to us, yes.
Looked worse to me. We talked about the context of all those things in that fight of he has to go, he knows he's cut, this could be a problem. Now, in fairness, I believe one of the cuts if not both, were in round 1. This stopped in round 3. So you did have 2 rounds of bleeding. Now, I bring this up because did you see Michael Chandler's tweet?
Yes. This is the guy who told me I had a broken leg. Yeah.
Beautiful. So at an event, to tie this all lovingly together, put a bow on this, Jimmy, you and I were both at that event. Never knowing what would happen years later, but in the context of the story, we're at this event, where they also pulled the stool out from underneath him, I believe, as well.
Yes.
He says the same doctor looked at him in the eye and told him he had a broken leg, and that he knew he didn't, and he could continue. I think this stoked the fire worse than anything else, because it truly was the same doctor. If there's one thing you can count on with MMA Twitter, they'll get on some facts. They pulled this guy up. He's on the athletic commission. Now, the other side of this is we're putting these massive fights in a area that has not had a lot of MMA fighting. So you're getting a lot of, I guess, non-MMA experienced doctors. And I'm never going to go against a doctor. He's a medical professional for a reason. I didn't go to school for that. If he feels someone is not safe to continue, he says, you're not safe to continue. He is there because fighters, corners, coaches will always say, I can go, I'm good, for the most part. Nate was not going to bail. So clearly you're right. You can't play, I guess, coach couch, right, in doing this. Or would that be couch coach? I don't know. I didn't practice that before. But you're right. You can't do that. But at the same time, even Joe Rogan, or you, by some people's estimation, said, we'll run it back in Vegas, which to me said, oh, in Vegas, this fight wasn't going to get stopped. And I hate to say it, I feel like if it was in Vegas, that fight would have kept going.
Good chance. You and I, another thing you have to keep in mind, we have to have some kind of impartiality, being that we're not in the fight. We didn't coach anybody. We're not in the corners. Michael Chandler's leg, his foot, his ankle was folding like a lawn chair multiple times. We all saw that. Sure, his leg was not broken. He could not effectively stand up, move, and fight. And he can tweet about it and get angry about it. And I was there, and I was like, his ankle actually just kept folding over and over and over again. So the doctor was wrong about it being broken. Was he wrong about his inability to continue fighting? I don't think so. Dude could barely walk. It kept going. So it's one of those things where you'd imagine with a little bit of distance, he would understand, yeah, it kept folding on me. The guy made the right decision. And Dana White actually said in the press conference, I was mad at first. And then I went back and I saw Nate's eye. And I went, yeah, maybe he had a point. Now, what we have all Dana White's initial reaction, disappointment and, oh, that sucks, and da-da-da. We don't have the access 10 minutes later to the guy like Dana did, where he looked at him and went, oh, yeah, that's pretty bad. We don't all have that. So we all have one side of the coin. We don't have the other one. The one thing I think he could have done better, the doctor, is it didn't look any worse at the end of round 3 than it did the end of round 2. So there didn't seem to be that continuation where it's like, oh, wow, now it's getting really bad. Secondly, he asked Nate if he could continue and then stopped it, which was confusing. If his answer doesn't matter, why are you asking him? So I thought the guy could have handled it a little better and made it a little clearer, and it would have been less confusing. Because that kind of bothered me. That he asked Nate, and Nate goes, yeah, I'm fine. And then he turns around and goes, stop the fight. And it's like, why'd you ask him then if his answer didn't mean anything? So that confused a lot of the fans. So those two things together. Was it Joe Rogan, I think? I thought it was Dominic Cruz at first, because when I put on my heads, I don't listen to the commentary when I'm studying a fight, but when I'm on SiriusXM, we put on our headsets to do audio check, and then we can hear the commentary. And I think it was Joe Rogan who said that guy should know who he's looking at when he's looking at the cut. No, he shouldn't. A doctor should not at all care who it is. It's not up to the doctor to know that fighter's record and how tough they are. He should be impartial. Either the cut is bad enough to stop the fight or it's not. things about who's on the A side and who's supposed to win, who's not supposed to win, how tough they are, should not be a consideration for a medical professional. So that's definitely true. But yeah, I mean, our emotions, and the guy, I guess, is getting harassed at his office, and people are calling his secretaries and threatening him and all this stuff. And it's really hard on the guy. And I think that's completely unfair. But, that anger, I understand the disappointment, but I don't understand the anger and the outrage. That's a different thing.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. I understand that in the context of the fight, we were kind of seeing what we wanted. We wanted to see that boxing match with MMA gloves. I just could not get over how much Jorge was dominating. I mean, that he put him down quick, and the blood was flowing early. And I know Nate cuts easy, and that's, well documented. I could not agree with you more. I guess I need to be careful with how I say this, because I love Joe Rogan and what he's done for the UFC and MMA in general and the audience that he's brought to it. But, a lot of people took what you said there about Nate and pretty much put it in the same context of, I don't care who he's looking at. If it was Jorge Masvidal, if it was Nate. If it can stop one fighter, it should stop all fighters. And to say or put the pressure on, and I think this is what really more than anything speaks to the power of Joe Rogan's commentary and voice. I think him insinuating, hey, that doctor should know who Nate Diaz is and his ability to fight through these things, and that he's a 4th and 5th round fighter, and this could be the most exciting part of the fight, is what really sparked a lot of that viral angst of this isn't what we purchased. And I know that by no stretch of the imagination did he mean for that to be the community's reaction, but that is how so many people seem to have taken it. And I absolutely agree. Sometimes the MMA community can be one of the best things, like we just saw, in trying to find someone's daughter when they go missing. But at other times, they can be one of the worst, because there's a relentless passion on either side of the coin. And to harass this guy at his job is just going to another level. That just doesn't need to go. I mean, I'll bring it back to where we just were. We just got to New York. Like, the last thing they need is more, demolishment of MMA, and look what these fans are doing, and maybe we should reconsider this. Granted, they never will. Look at how much money they make down there. But at the same time, I agree. A lot of the commentating has power to it. And unfortunately, sometimes with that power, you can set people the wrong way. And I think those comments really helped push people to that narrative of, hey, this was a bad stoppage.
It certainly could have, because kind of the venom that I've seen in a fight that was one-sided. This wasn't a back and forth fight, and who knows what. This was a one-sided. I don't care if you're a foaming at the mouth 209 Diaz worshipping fan. He was getting tuned up for 3 rounds. So a lot of the outrage to me doesn't reflect the one-sided nature of the fight. This was not a back and forth fight where round 4th could have gone either way. Sure, it could have gone either way. I mean, could have gotten hit by lightning. But the first 2 rounds were a one-sided blowout. And yet everyone's so mad about the stoppage. So that doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. If it had been a much closer fight, if it had been an even fight, I too would have been more outraged at what was taken from me. But the reality was, all I could see was more and more of the same thing happening. I mean, Jorge was much bigger. He really took away range. I know Nate tried to do what Nate does, and he did get some kind of a little bit of good cage time and gloating, and he looked like he was encouraging it, but at the same time, you go back and watch the Conor fight. I mean, when he was encouraging the firefight, he was at least retaliating as much as he was receiving. And in this case, he wasn't. And there's just no 2 ways around that. The numbers actually tell the tale.
Yeah, his face told the tale. The whole fight told the tale. I mean, Masvidal had a masterful performance, and Nate could never find his offensive rhythm. If there's a rematch, provided it's on a good card, I'll watch it. I'll pay for it. But I really don't see it being any more competitive. I really don't. I think Masvidal just has his numbers. Sharp boxer, accurate, has real welterweight power, which Nate has never had. And I think he's got the right formula to beat Nate 9 times out of 10.
All right, to put a wrap on this show, since you did mention it earlier that you did watch it, Corey Anderson, Johnny Walker. Listen, I was not sold on Johnny Walker, and I've got the lost bet slip from when he fought Misha Cirkunov to prove it. I really thought that his recklessness would at one point catch up to him. I didn't know that it was going to be against Corey Anderson, but it absolutely was. Corey Anderson put on a masterclass performance, but the question I asked you was a self-fulfilling prophecy because he did not come right after John Jones initially, but then later he said if they don't give him the title fight, he's going to test free agency.
Yeah, they love that at the UFC.
Yeah,
they love it when you, after one big fight, the biggest fight of your career so far, demand a fight against one of the pound-for-pound greats. They love being blackmailed like that. So Dana did not react well to it. I don't think it's going to go well for him if he sticks to his guns with this. I think Reyes is certainly first in line. He's maybe second. And I talked about the placement on the card, where if he were next in line, he wouldn't be on the prelims. So I don't think they were thinking about the winner of this fight being first in line. So all those things together, it doesn't work out well for him at all, in my opinion.
I would agree. Take the good and carry forward. I mean, the reality is, depending on what happened with Reyes and John Jones, if that comes to fruition, he probably had a good lineup for a title fight. Perhaps after one more, maybe he makes a compelling, push after that fight and takes a good amount of time off in between. But yeah, the UFC really isn't good with you pulling their card and saying, hey, either give me this or release me, because guess what? They got a whole bunch of other fighters that are ready to sign on the line. And if you want to be the few that wants to walk out the door, they don't have any problem letting you go.
Don't let it hit your ass on the way out. Right.
With that said, a little bit longer than normal, Jimmy. Look, we got overtime practically. We appreciate, again, man, all the support. We really can't thank you guys enough. We are actually in the process of trying to get you even more content. We will discuss how we will do that when the time comes. But we have heard your guys' need and unquenchable thirst for Jimmy Smith commentary, and we will do everything to continue to provide it to you. Appreciate you checking this out, and be back very shortly with more commentary. Everything to continue to provide it to you. Appreciate you checking this out, and be back very shortly with more commentary.